very glad that very pleased to have this session with Martin and Siyaves, because it's on a very controversial and important topic. Um, you probably know that Martin co-organized the Ilyenkov Centenary Conference in Berlin in 2024, and Siyaves is one of the leading editors of Marxism and Sciences online magazine, apart from other distinguished positions he holds. Um, so we're really pleased to have them in. They presented these ideas. Is it last week in a conference in Prague? Um, so they're going to bring in some of those experiences, perhaps. Um, yeah, and then as we have two presenters tonight, we're going to give them about 20 minutes each, and then turn it over to the rest of you. So please do put comments in the chat. But I think the experience we've had recently is that, oh, here's Ralph coming in now. It does distract a little bit from to have them going on all the time during the beginning of the introductions. So maybe keep that to a minimum, because we will have a good discussion afterwards. Yeah, and just to say, this is our penultimate session of the year, and we'll be having the next one December the 9th with Isa Jacobs, which you'll all get told about soon. And yeah, again, very big thanks to Martin and Siyaves for coming tonight. So just getting if people start coming in, but I guess we better start.
Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen. We prepared a presentation. So I hope everyone can see it. So wait. Now I've got a so everyone can hear me, everyone can see the presentation.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, and yeah, thank you for the invitation, and welcome to our presentation, Reclaiming the Reflection Theory of Truth by Siyaves and me. Introducing me, currently I'm a research associate in Cluj in Romania in a project on the philosophy in late socialism and polycrisis, and Siyaves is also working there. Keep it short to don't lose any more time. This is the outline for the next, I would say, 40 to 45 minutes. The background of our paper, or the background of our co-work here, is that we are invited by Historical Materialism to write a paper on reflection theory in their special issue on Eastern Marxism. So I'm going to tell you something about the aims of our paper. And you also see here that we picked 5 points out of 10 to 11 that we want to address in this paper. So please take into consideration that we are at the beginning of our paper so far. So firstly, we want to talk about reflection in Marxism, how it was criticized there, how Hans-Heinz Holz, I'm the biographer of him, and Ewald Ilyenkov. Then we want to talk about reflection as objective activity, the schema of activity and knowledge formation, and last but not least, reflection as opening to reality. Was that this paper or the special issue is a very good opportunity reclaiming the concept of reflection as a central epistemological tool in Marxist theory. And as you all know, it's very unpopular at the moment. So we thought that's a good opportunity to reclaim it. And to do so, we have to challenge, as we think, some misinterpretations of reflection as passive mirroring or photocopying, and want to demonstrate its active dialectical character, which is grounded in labor and objective activity. So for us, reflection remains a vital concept for understanding how knowledge emerges through social practice and the material transformation of reality. So as you all know, reflection became, due to the existence of the Soviet Union, a central principle in philosophy, political theory, and scientific methodology. And one key witness is, of course, Lenin. He never developed a systematic theory of reflection, but he made some very systematic commentaries on it. And as you see here in this short quotation, there are two tendencies within reflection theory very well connected. So in 1913, he said, just as human knowledge reflects nature, which exists independently of humans, so human social knowledge reflects the economic structure of society. So we have these both tendencies. On the one hand, we have this more sociological idea, and on the other hand, a more epistemological one. And of course, we all know the quotations where he says more about it, more about reflection in an ontologic manner, for example. So due to the existence of the Soviet Union, reflection was widely used and, of course, you can say universalized, and to some extent. Many scholars try to figure out how to talk about reflection and different themes and different topics. And as far as I see, there are five topics that were really, really important. Firstly, sensory physiological processes were described as reflection. You all know Pavlov, for example, or the relation between sentences, symbols, judgment, and so on, and facts. Think of all the debates that were going on between in the question of the relation of reality and formal logic. Then we have scientific organized knowledge, the idea of the sciences of science and how social institutions reflect the social groundings. Then, of course, the ontologic property of matter. Think of Todor Pavlov and this very, very thick book on reflection theory. And of course, in political confrontations, it was widely used as ideology critical intention, maybe to attack opponents or to claim that these thinkings and doings are rooted in certain social structures. So, of course, in the 20th century, Marxism, reflection theory became a major site of contention. So, as I said, it was especially prominent in Soviet Marxist philosophy, while the critics came mostly from abroad. You can say Western Marxism, it's a difficult term to coin. But for example, Dominique Lecourt, who wrote on reflection theory from France, or Alfred Schmidt from the Federal Republic of Germany, or earlier in the 1920s, Karl Korsch or the young Georg Lukács, all of them dismissed reflection theory as something mechanistic or ideologically compromised. And basically, they are saying that reflection theory is being physicalist and it cannot be used in other terms or in other fields of philosophy, and it's not good, it's not the proper concept at all. And we think that this also that we're going around where the people used reflection as something to attack opponents or to say that they are doing right. So we think that this led to both ideological and philosophical rejections of the concept, which are grounded in misunderstandings of its theoretical basis. So I can identify, as far as I see, several, let's say, critical fronts. Of course, we have reflection as a concept. It is in philosophy from the beginning on. You can see it, you can find it in antique philosophy. And it became very prominent during the Renaissance when mirrors were widely used in craftsmanship. And you also find concepts of reflection in idealistic philosophies and materialistic philosophies. Even George Berkeley has a concept of reflection. But going a bit into the detail, like very famous critical fronts or very famous critics outside of Marxism against the reflection theory was, for example, religious philosophies. In the 1950s, 1960s, in Germany, Thomism was very, very famous, very, very prominent. And basically, they say that the ideal is not dependent, God created reality. There is no materialistic idea of reflection. Or one argument is the so-called third observer, which was provided by neo-Kantianist philosophers like Wilhelm Windelband. And the argument goes like this, that he says, it's not a proper category because reflection is a vicious circle because it presupposes an observer. So if you imagine a situation, a mirror A, and an object that is in front of the mirror, you need an observer C to say if the object in the mirror is as valid as the one that is reflected, as the one that is reflected. So I think that there are many assumptions here in this kind of argument, basically saying that the world consists of two realms, like the ideal world and the real world. And the other thing is that he thinks reflections happens inside one individual, despite the fact that he's not talking about practice at all. And there are also critical fronts inside Marxism, or where inside Marxism. As I said, reflection is not an active process, but a passive one. Adorno, Gajo Petrovic, or Anton Pannekoek provided this idea. And basically, they identify the idea of reflection with the physical process, which is, of course, not an active one, but a passive one. So they say, if it is a physical process, then it cannot be used as a philosophical category. Then there were a lot of discussions about the question, is a reflection a metaphor, and to what extent it is a metaphor? Is it something that we use in everyday language, or is it an analogy? But are analogies as precise like natural sciences, like sciences that uses measurements and things like that? So we should get rid of reflection because it's not as good as for a concept at all. And the other things, and I said, like in Lenin, there are these two tendencies. Plekhanov had this idea that reflection is a result of the social situation that is basically determined on the state of production relations and productive forces, so a more sociological idea, which was heavily criticized by some scholars in the Soviet Union, saying, okay, that is too deterministic because it cannot reflect the situation and the activities of sciences. What is with the things that are not discovered yet, or what is with new things? How can people overcome social relations if everything is bounded to the social situation that the people are into? And the last one, last but not least, one prominent scholar was Nedoshevin. He was a scholar in aesthetics. He had this idea that reflection is a scientific and objective reflection of reality, and basically saying that reflection is grounded into the biological apparatuses we have. So everything is a reflection. And in this case, I would say reflection is here designed as a repetition of the objective world. So we want to rule out these kind of ideas, and we have to say, what is reflection for us? And I here draw upon philosophers from the GDR, namely Dieter Wittig. In the 70s, he had this idea saying, okay, reflection as a concept means that reflection can just be conceptualized as a relation within time. So that basically means that being a reflection and the being of the reflected is one property of the ideal and material things. And it just can be realized if the following four things are realized. If one of this is not realized, then it's not a reflection relation. So Specifically, a given x1 is considered to be a representation or a reflection of a given x if x1 and x are different, if x1 exists dependently of x, if x exists independently of x1, and last but not least, and x1 corresponds to x in a certain respect. And the whole discussions within Marxism, Leninism, and also outside Marxism, centered around the question of reflection is, what is the correspondence? How can we conceptualize it? And how can we understand it? So we have to say something about correspondence. And in Prague last week, one critic was like, okay, you have to say something about that because otherwise it's not a good idea to propose. So I think correspondence, of course, means that something is equivalent or that something matches, but there's more. The Latin meaning of correspondencia means also a reciprocal response. So there is the presupposition that there is already a structure, that it is a relation within time. And to illustrate that, how complicated it is with correspondence, I will show you this picture. I've taken this one in August in Norway, standing on the top of a mountain. And as you can see, I recommend go to Norway for hiking. It's very beautiful. Here you see on the left side, you see a small town, and on the other side you see the mountains and the fjord, which is which is at the crossroad here. So now, how could a correspondence or a good reflection of this topological situation can be described? Here you can see Google Maps. This is the map of the situation I've shown to you. I was standing at the top of the Storafjellet, and there the small town is Stanghelle, what you can see here. And the height, the difference of the height and is shown by different colors and how steep the things are and so on and so forth. So I would say this is an accurate reflection of the topological situation that I was into. And I needed this map to orientate myself. Now explaining it more in a philosophical way, I would say the map corresponds to the given landscape because the difference in height between the points X and Y, like between me and the town of Stanghelle, is shown in the difference of colors between the points X and Y. So the correspondence ability of relations, but rather in the fact that the difference in colors is given precisely when the difference in height exists. Otherwise, it would not be a good reflection. And I cannot use the reflection or the map to orientate myself and going for a hike and to see where I'm actually am. So here for a short moment, above pictures again, that you see what I'm referring to. So I said that we want to discuss several scholars who made important contributions to reflection theory. The first one is Hans-Heinz Holz. As I said, I'm the biographer, so we could talk a lot about his life and works, but we don't have the time here. So he wrote extensively on reflection. And as far as I see, there are two major contributions he made to the reflection theory that are worthy to discuss. So firstly, basically saying reflection is an exact necessary metaphor. And secondly, he says that reflection theory covers a dialectic materialist ontology and epistemology. And basically he's saying to justify an epistemology materialist dialectics, it should be grounded in that. Or for him, it is important to say that this metaphor is not used just in everyday life. So it is more a concept. And it can be a concept if it is clear that the logical structure of this metaphors establishes a connection, a certain relation, which he calls self-difference, der Selbstunterschied. So now imagine a situation of a mirror and a thing that is in front of a mirror. So the mirror image refers to something that reflects itself. And that presupposes that the mirror image and the reflected objects are different individual items or ensembles of items. And that the reflected object enters the mirror image as a horizon, not in a physical way, so that it cannot be a physicalist metaphor anymore, but more in the way that the mirror image shows the position of the reflected object in a certain perspective, in a certain context. So in the mirror image is always just the thing or the side facing the mirror. And the mirror does not see what is behind him, and the mirror does not see what is not facing the mirror. So entering the mirror means that the mirror image is the virtual representative of the reflected object, which can be just something within reality. Because within the mirror, a second reality emerges, which is in fact something real, because the mirror is a real thing among other things. And it is really important to note that a mirror is just a mirror when it reflects something. So in conclusion, he's basically saying that a reflection is not something that is not a complete, or a mirror image is not a complete representation of a state of affairs. It is more like that similarities or respectively partial equivalences, or as I said, correspondence of the developed image with the represented. What does it mean? The mirror image should depict the constitutive structures of the state of affairs, or at least one aspect of reality in a central way. Think of the map that I've showed to you. And the mirror image is also a reconstruction of something objective that can only appear in a metaphor as what it is. If you are in front of a mirror, you see yourself and also an image of yourself. Or to put it in a more philosophical way, to quote Joseph König, which was very important for Holz and an underdog in German philosophy, that the mirror is, and I quote, the one and the same thing in which the mirror at itself, and the thing it reflects, and which as reflected by it is a certain way within it, are different. So that's the so-called self-difference or der Selbstunterschied. So important here is for Holz now that reflection is not just a metaphor that we use to describe things, that reflection is an exceptionally special relationship of being. So the mirror metaphor expresses for him a dialectical ontology, and here the structure re-emerges that I've shown to you, that it presupposes the other, that it embodies a determined relationality, and it reveals being as being in relation. So the idea of Holz stems from Leibniz and the monadology. He was one of the most important Leibniz scholars in the 20th century. I will not go into that. More important is his idea of ontology here, in contrast, for example, to Georg Lukács' ontology. And they had both a discussion in the 1960s about that topic. So for Holz, ontology deals with the structures of relations of being that can only be developed through the intentio obliqua of reflected forms of knowledge in model concepts. So saying it in an easy way, humans can grasp reality only in an indirect way. Whereas intentio recta, which is the idea of Lukács, basically saying or proposing the idea that we can grasp reality in a direct way. So Holz is more saying ontology is ontologic, and that means it is the systematization of knowledge about being. So that's what sciences basically are doing. And ontology is the knowing and speaking about the difference of being with oneself. Think of the metaphor. And ontology can only be developed today in the form of a theory of reflection. That is it's his thesis. I also want to illustrate that. This is the artwork called Infinity Mirrored Room by the Japanese exhibited in Switzerland. And some years ago in London, there was a big exhibition. And from the 1960s until today, she developed several objects called infinity mirrors. And this is an interesting cube because it reflects the surrounding in a very special way. But when you look inside it, then you see what Holtz means with a dialectical ontology based upon the mirror metaphor. So the artist put some lamps in it and like plenty of mirrors. And when you look inside of it, you see the infinity. You see the infinity in a finite space. And that is the idea of the mirror metaphor, that the mirror metaphor reveals in its logical structure the infinity of the universe. And we use language to do that. That's basically his idea here. It's not that he tries to say with the reflection theory or with the mirror metaphor, we want to explain everything, but we can explain how the things are so constructed that they constitute something like we call world. So basically his idea is saying that he wants to situate the subject within material relation that conditions its capacity for reflection. So subjectivity for Holtz is a reflection of the reflection, and it's also the task for philosophy to do that. So that it becomes pretty clear that consciousness or the mind emerges as embedded, perspectival, and materially determined. And where does this happen? In objective activity. Objective activity refers the entire field of objective relationships between humans and their environment. So the influence on nature by us as social subject is also embedded in the ensemble of material conditions based on the mutuality of relationships, or as the reciprocal response or correspondence, as I told you so far. And now I have to bridge to Siyaves part. In the tradition of Marxism, reflection and activity was mostly disconnected. But if we want to root ourselves into the works of Marx and Engels, and of course, both of them never developed a systematic reflection theory, but when they talk about it, then they talk about it in a very systematic manner. For example, in Capital Volume 1, when Marx is differentiating his materialist dialectical method, he states, in contrast to Hegel, and I quote, "The ideal is nothing but the material world reflected in the mind of man," which is an interesting translation because in the German original text, reflection is a two-sided phenomenon. It's transformation and translation, and the product of the transformation and the translation, which is pretty interesting because basically Lenin and other guys did not say something different here. So reflection is an objective activity of a social subject and also the result of that activity, which is permanent. So objective activity includes ideal activity or reflection as transformation and translation of the material into the ideal, and also a material activity of the transformation, the material activity of the transformation of the material into the material, the core of which is labor. And Siyaves, now it's you.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. Just to, because of constraints of time, I'm gonna try to read my thing a bit quickly. Um, as Martin stated, I just need to restate that we are at the beginning of our work. You might, see there are some sort of, maybe discrepancies sometimes in the wordings that we're using. Whereas, for instance, I'm going to talk about whether reflection is a mirror image or not, but definitely that is not against what Martin says, because he's talking about the reflection as a metaphor there. I mean, the mirror image, I'm sorry, as a metaphor, whereas my take on, like the critic of mirror images on, this mechanistic understanding, so to say. So in reclaiming the reflection theory of truth, I begin with the concept of the ideal as developed by Ilyankov. Ilyankov reorients our understanding of thought and truth by grounding both in objective, socially mediated activity, that is labor. He emphasizes that knowledge, truth, and the ideal do not emerge from isolated mental representations or innate cognitive structures, but from the objective structure of human activity. As he puts it, thinking is not the act of an individual mind, but a socially organized process. It is the spiritual theoretical culture as a whole that shapes conceptual consciousness. These points become especially clear in Ilyankov's treatment of Spinoza. While Spinoza is often grouped with Leibniz and Kant in affirming the rationality of thought, Ilyankov stresses a decisive difference. For Spinoza, thinking is a social act. It is not fashioned after the model of individual consciousness, but arises from the collective species-wide activity of mankind. In this way, Spinoza anticipates a materialist epistemology where the subject of cognition is not the atomized individual, but the social human being, to the extent that the individual internalizes historically and socially developed ideals. Yet Ilyankov is not uncritical. While he sees Spinoza as a precursor of dialectical thinking, particularly in the way Spinoza conceives substance as the unity of thought and extension, he also notes a fundamental limitation. Spinoza, Ilyankov argues, looks down on labor. He sees scientific concepts as innate, like hands and arms provided by nature, rather than as the outcome of historically developed material activity. As Ilyankov writes, quote, what Spinoza failed to understand was the fact that the originally imperfect intellectual instruments are products of material labor rather than of nature. He believed them to be products of nature, and in this and only this point lies the weakness of his position, end quote. For Ilyankov, the ideal is not a metaphysical precondition for reality, but a practical abstraction, one that arises only in and through social labor. This makes a shift from the mind-determined world to a world-determined consciousness mediated by activity. Consciousness and agency are not prior to activity. They are its products. Plato's original notion of the ideal, endorsed by Ilyankov, already points in this direction. Ideals, Ilyankov writes, are, quote, the universal norms of that culture within which an individual awakens to conscious life, as well as requirements that he must internalize as a necessary law of his own life activity, end quote. Here, ideals are not subjective values or mental projections, but are objective demands that emerge from social life. They are embedded in artifacts, norms, practices. In short, the material culture that individuals must appropriate in order to become social beings. Ilyankov defines ideality as a relation between two material things or processes where one represents the universal nature of the other. The ideal is not a thing in itself, but a relation that only exists within the act of representation. This act and the ideal form it makes possible arise solely within the social world of human beings. This relational, socially mediated understanding of ideality also explains why human labor, unlike that of a donkey, produces value in economic sense. As Ilyankov points out in Humanism and Science, value, like knowledge, is an ideal form that requires social validation. Both value and knowledge are irreducible to their physical manifestations. They exist only in and through the social universe. In this sense, the ideal is what Ilyankov calls the schema or pattern of real activity. Quote, the ideal is the pattern of the real object-oriented activity of man, consistent with the form of the things outside the head, outside the brain, end quote. But it is only the pattern, not the activity itself, precisely because it is a representation of real human activity with things in the external world. It can be treated as a specific object of thought. As he explains, again, quote, only because it's a pattern or image of real, purposeful human activity within things, with things in the external world, can it be presented and examined as a specific object, aimed at changes in the image of the thing and not at the thing itself presented in this image. This is, I think, something that fits the map metaphor that Martin talked about. This distinction marks the difference between material activity and ideal activity. The former transforms the thing itself, the latter transforms the representation, the concept, the schema of the thing. In sum, for Ilyankov, the ideal is not a mental shadow of the real, nor a Platonic form floating outside of history. It is the historically developed scheme of human interaction with the world. All human products, every artifact, every concept, every form of value bear the mark of this ideality because they arise and reflect socially organized labor. Now I try to elaborate a little bit more on reflection as objective activity. To understand reflection in the Marxist tradition, we must first abandon the widespread but mistaken notion that it is a mental mirroring of external reality. Reflection is not a passive operation of the mind. It is an active process, and its true form is labor. Labor, in this sense, is not merely an economic category or a utilitarian act of survival. It is the constitutive process of human society, the historical condition for the emergence of knowledge itself. Labor is a dialectical praxis, a form of engagement that links subject and object, transforming both in the process. What distinguishes human labor from the activity of non-human animals is, first and foremost, its social form. Human labor is not simply instinctual. It is socially organized, purposive, and historically evolving. Sociality and historicity do not precede labor. They emerge from it. It is through this uniquely human form of activity that the human animal becomes a truly social being. This labor also contains an ideal aspect, the anticipation of result, the projection of the ends, the creation of tools and symbols. Labor does not merely adapt to nature, it transforms it intentionally. Through labor, the human being shapes the world and is in turn shaped by it. It is precisely this recursive process of transformation that makes knowledge possible. At its core, labor is a mediated metabolic exchange between humans and nature. It originates from a fundamental contradiction, the contradiction between human life and the natural world, a world to which humans belong, but which they must transform in order to survive. This contradiction cannot be resolved by contemplation alone. It demands action. As Goethe states, in the beginning was the action. Labor then is not just how we survive, it is how we come to know. So why is labor constitutive? Because it is the contradiction in motion, the unity of opposites, thought and being, subject and object, human and nature. It is through this unity that knowledge emerges, not as reflection in a mirror, but as a reflection in activity. Labor is not simply about negating or manipulating object. It also involves the transformation of the subject. To act upon the object, the subject must adapt, must conform to the determination of the object in order to negate it effectively. Thus, in negating the object, the subject also negates itself. And through this dual negation, both the object is reconstituted as social reality and the subject emerges as social being. This is why Marx could write that the human being is the ensemble of social relations. Labor is not merely individual effort. It always implies a mode of cooperation, a historically and socially specific organization of action. And through this cooperative form, the human subject emerges, not as an abstract mind, but as the product of a social activity. Now, the first act of abstraction is tool making. To abstract is to take a thing out of its natural context, to liberate it from immediate embeddedness in nature, and to repropose it as a tool. Abstraction then is not first a mental event. It is a bodily act, a practical reconfiguration of the material. As Ilyankov writes, quote, production of labor implements as the first universal form of human activity, as the objective basis for all other human traits, without exception, as the simplest elementary form of man's human existence. That is, what is expressed in the universal concept of the essence of man in the system of Marx and Engels. End quote. This is not simply a restatement of Marx's fifth thesis on Feuerbach. It is its practical elaboration. As Marx critiques Feuerbach for understanding senselessness only as contemplation and not as practical human sensuous activity, Ilyankov reinforces the point. Quote, "It is not the concept of man as being producing labor implements that contains in itself the concept of all other human traits, but rather the actual fact of producing labor implements contains in itself the necessity of their origin and development." End quote. So the point of departure is not consciousness, not sense data, not pure reason, but labor as the expression of contradiction, the contradictory unity of human and nature, of thought and being, of senselessness and abstraction. Even the logical categories, universal, particular, individual, for instance, cannot be reduced to logical forms detached from practice. Their relationship is not abstract or metaphysical. It is material and senses. The relation between the universal and the particular must be grasped in the relation between a thing and human activity, a sensus practice that transforms both. Reflection, therefore, is not a picture in mind. It is objective activity in the world. It is labor. And it is only through this active engagement with reality that concepts, ideals, and ultimately truth can emerge. And I need to elaborate a bit further here on how we arrived at this. It's about the dialectics of thinking and being. If reflection is to be understood as objective activity, then we must also grasp its dialectical core, the unity of thinking and being. Labor, as we've seen, is the process in which the unity is enacted. It is not merely the background of thought, it is its very medium. Labor embodies a mutual transformation between subjectivity and objectivity, between the agent and the world. This means that thought itself is a form of objective activity, a higher order manifestation of praxis. Thinking is not separate from activity, not a detached inner process that surveys an external reality. It is a socially and historically situated mode of engagement with the world. And the identity of thinking and being is not an abstract unity, something like Hegel's totality suspended in pure thought, but a dialectical relationship, a unity of opposites mediated through material activity. Human cognition, then, is not the passive reception of appearances. It is the historical resolution, or better, the ongoing resolution of the contradiction between thought and its object. This contradiction is not dissolved in contemplation, but acted out and transformed through labor. In the very act of transforming the world, reality becomes intelligible. Now, where does Hegel go wrong? Let's just take a look at this. For all his dialectical brilliance, he works out the active side only abstractly, as Marx states. He develops it as pure thinking, not as sensus human activity, that is not as labor. In doing so, he commits a form of to a form of idealism, not merely in terms of content, but in structure. He attributes reality to thought without fully deriving thought from reality. He does not show the decidedness, to use Marx's term, it's decidedness, but elevates it as the true substance of the world. Hegel wants to concretize the universal. Marx, by contrast, universalizes the concrete. Where Hegel descends from the abstract to the concrete, deducing reality from pure categories, Marx ascends from the real, the senses, the historical specific, to the universal. Hegel's universal are celestial, Marx reveals their terrestrial essence. As Ilyenkov notes in a sharp critic, quote, according to Hegel, definitions of value cannot be obtained in the way Marx obtained them. A Hegelian adept would say about the first sections of Capital that the definitions of one particular form of value are there taken to be universal definitions of value, while they are not universal definitions at all. He would recommend to deduce universal definitions of value from definitions of reasonable will. End quote. In other words, Hegel still operates within the dualistic framework, despite his claim to the contrary. His unity of thought and reality is a dissolution of reality into thought. Instead of revealing the materiality of thought, he declares thought to be the ultimate reality. This is not a solution to the contradiction between thinking and being. It's a retreat from it. Materialist dialectics, on the other hand, begins from the contradiction, not by positing two substances, but by demonstrating their unity in and through human activity. The ideal, the concept, the thought, all are reconstructions of real movement, not detached mental categories. Thought is objective thinking, or more precisely, thinking objectivity. Its negativity does not consist in denying reality, but in negating it in its given form, in reshaping it through practice. quote, thought is not a simple passive replica of the general forms of sensually given fact. It is rather a specific mode of spiritual activity of a socially developed subject. In the phenomenon open to direct contemplation, things mostly look quite different from what they are in essence expressed in a concept. If both coincided directly, science as a special theoretical analysis of phenomena would not be needed at all. And that is exactly why the mere reference to the fact that such and such general traits may be recorded in phenomenon open to direct contemplation cannot as yet serve as a weighty argument either for or against the abstraction of concepts, end quote. And this is precisely where where both, for instance, verificationism and falsificationism fail. They search for correspondence at the level of appearance, while truth lies in the reconstruction of essence through conceptual labor. So we must ask again, where do concepts come from? Where does their truth come from? To say that they're transcendental or timeless or ideal in Plato's sense is a non-answer. It just asserts that thought is different, special, irreducible. But why is it so? Hegel's answer, though initially radical, thought arises through the negation of the given, he says, ends in retreat. He asserts reality as the other of thought, making thought's negation a mere subtraction. Thought becomes non-nature or non-matter, a metaphysical leftover. But if thought and matter are two exclusive substances, then we cannot speak of a dialectical relation, let alone a contradiction between them. In this way, Hegel betrays his own method. The unity of contradictories becomes a pseudo-unity in which matter dissolves into spirit and contradiction evaporates in abstraction. The result is a kind of philosophical idealism masquerading as dialectics. It is only through practice, through concrete human activity and its height labor, that we can truly demonstrate and deduce the dialectical unity of thinking and being, and thus the formation of concepts become an object of real explanation, not metaphysical decree. Here lies the missing link, not only in Hegel, but in all forms of idealism and even metaphysical materialism, the omission of human activity, the neglect of reality as the reality of sensuous human practice. When we fetishize the concept as if it exists apart from human engagement, we detach it from its real ground. But there is no concept, no science, no knowledge outside the social universe of human activity. So we are back to the question again. What is the ideal? Quote, the ideal is the subjective image of objective reality, i.e., reflection of the external world in the forms of man activity, in the forms of his consciousness and will. The ideal is not an individual psychological fact, much less a physiological fact, but a socio-historical one, the product and form of mental production. End quote. Thinking does not emerge from direct unity between humans and nature. It emerges only within society, within collectively produced, historically specific material and spiritual culture. An isolated individual, if such a being could exist, would no more be capable of thinking than a disembodied brain could think outside the skull. Between contemplating and thinking man and nature in itself, there existed a very important mediated link, through which nature was transformed into thought and thought into the body of nature. That was practice, labor, production. It was production in the broadest sense of the term that transformed the object of nature into the object of contemplation and thought. End quote. What is given in contemplation is not truth. It is the form of objective activity carved into objectivity by social labor. Quote, a purely objective picture of nature was therefore disclosed to man, not in contemplation, but only through activity and in the activity of man socially producing his own life of society. End quote. This is precisely where activity materialism, which I think is Ilyankov's position, radically departs from both substance materialism and idealism in all their subjective and objective forms. The thing in itself, for instance, is not a noumenon forever hidden. It is disclosed through social practice, through the very activity that shapes it. Through labor, through praxis, subject and object comes into being, and only then do they enter the dialectic. As Ilyankov reminds us, quoting Marx, of course, the question whether objective truth is an attribute of human thought is not a theoretical, but a practical question. Man must prove the truth, in other words, the reality and power, the decidedness of his thinking in practice. There is no ideal in nature. The ideal emerges only in society. It is the reflection of human activity, objectified, inscribed into reality, and made knowable through that very act. That is the dialectic of thinking and being. That is reflection. To conclude, what we have seen is that reflection is not a passive mirroring of the world, but the active socially mediated process through which both knowledge and the knower emerge. From Ilyankov's concept of the ideal to the constitutive role of labor to the dialectical unity of thinking and being, reflection names a dynamic material process in which thought and reality co-develop. And it is precisely this process that opens reality up to us, not as something given, but as something made accessible through practice. Martin will now take up this final point, reflection as the very means through which reality becomes intelligible and knowable. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Siyaves. So to summarize, we hope that we have shown that Widerspiegelung or reflection is not conceived as a mere reproduction of reality, but as a world-disclosing relation that brings the mediated structure of being to appearance. That means at least two things. That reflections opens up reality by constituting a field of meaning in which the real and its laws and form becomes knowable only through its mediated images. So maybe you think of like the history of cosmologies or something. If we doing research on it, we see what was important to the people under certain social conditions and what were they capable of opening up the reality. And secondly, in reproducing the world within consciousness, reflection transforms both the knowing subject and the known object. And this process of mediated correspondence enables not only cognitive apprehension, but also the practical transformation of reality. So think of the importance of sciences nowadays as a productive force. And I would say thank you very much for your attention. And now we can discuss what we've just presented to you.
Can you close the yeah, thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to hand over in a moment, but just to thank you for that, and also to say anybody here who, I think there's some new people here, if you want to be informed of our further activities, please put your email into the chat, and then you can be told about the next few events. Yanis is kindly agreed to facilitate the discussion, and the way to do it is by either putting your hand up or indicating in the chat that you'd like to speak. So I hand over to Yanis. Thank you, Yanis. You got to unmute.
Thank you, Corina. Thank you, Corina. So, any questions, comments? I see George and Daremas, they have a question. We start with George Berger, and then we proceed with Giorgio Daremas.
Can I start? Okay. I would like to thank the speakers for this very incisive presentation. I have a kind of critical comment, and I will pose it also as a question. Okay. Let's start with the mirror image. This is a very good idea that the reflected object in a mirror, the reflection of an object in a mirror, it's an objective reflection. We agree on that. Okay. Nevertheless, there is distortion of the object because it reverses the perspective. Okay. When we look at ourselves at the mirror, we don't see the face that somebody else outside of us sees. It sees something else. Nevertheless, I want to say something more basic. The relationship between the mirror and its reflected object has a material presupposition, which is light. You can never have a reflection from a mirror or any kind of surface without light. That means that we have a triadic structure. We don't just have a relation. We have to relate. Light mediates the relationship between the mirror and the reflected object. The same is true as far as, and I'm referring to Marx now, as far as labor is concerned. Because I got the impression that you understand labor as a kind of self-standing substance. In actuality, Marx argues that there is no such thing. Labor is a relationship, it's a social relation of production. It's the relationship of labor to the means of production, and through the mediation of means of production to the object of labor, that is nature. So again, we have a triadic structure, okay, through which we can understand it. Now, as far as you said that consciousness is a product of activity, okay, but this is not the complete picture, because consciousness as product of the activity elevates itself to self-consciousness. And then self-consciousness and then activity becomes the product of self-consciousness. So we have a kind of inversion of the initial relationship. And since you quoted Marx, Marx says in the first volume of Capital that the architect posits ideally the object that she wants to construct before its actual construction and before its activity. It's not that she starts building a building and through this activity she constructs the image of the building. Okay. So this is the relationship of self-consciousness to the activity. Okay. It has a dual structure together. And I want to conclude by the following. You also said very nicely that the true translation of the term reflection should be transformation in Marx. That means that you have an objective form of the object received by the subject, and transformed means that a new form is posited upon the objective form of the subject. So we have a change. We don't have a kind of duplication of the form, which is important. And I concluded with the following question. Marx is talking in the introduction to the Grundrisse, his methodological viewpoint is that social reality is layered, has many layers. So my question is, what does reflection reflect? Appearances or the essence of social reality? Because the essence of social reality is hidden. If the relationship of reflection is that of reflecting forms established in appearance, then we are in the realm of ideology, not in the realm of knowledge, okay, of organized knowledge that reconciles.
Thank you, Georgios.
That's my point. Thank you.
Siyaves and Martin, would you like to have a comment?
Go on, Siyaves. You are muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, I think definitely we talked about or we touched upon it at least in passing about the triadic relation, of course, when we talk about labor. But that was the whole point, that like it is the mediating link between reality and humanity, so to say. I mean, that reality that is independent, let's say, of humanity, and that's why so. Definitely labor is not a substance, definitely not, okay? At least this is not what I was trying to say. To the contrary, I was saying that, like, that's why I say we begin with the labor is the expression, or it is the ongoing contradiction itself. We labor or we act because there is something out there. Otherwise, we wouldn't, like if I was in a God, like godlike situation, why should I act? If I'm an absolute, this is a question you should ask Hegel, not for instance, me, inspired by Ilyankov, I think. Like, so the whole idea, as a matter of fact, one part of the thing that, as a matter of fact, we're trying to do, of course, we're very at the beginning, is also to kind of bringing back this, like I would say, togetherness of ontological and epistemological claims, so to say. why we want to know or why we need to act and so on and so forth. It's after all because, you know, like we are material beings living in a material world, so to say. And the question that you asked, just one thing I want to say, that what reflection reflects about social reality. Well, it's a very good question, but I think it has a very complicated answer. You know, like it kind of reminds me of the question that Lifshitz asked to Ilyenkov in a way. You know, like whether, you know, like ideals are, you know, like something like about timeless truth, or are they open to some sort of are they socially determined in the sense that they're relative or so on and so forth? Um, as I said, it's a complicated question in the sense that, you know, like even when we think about ideals or even about the process of reflection itself, that's the idea. We have to be critical, and we have to try to not to idolize the ideal, so to say. That would be my answer, at least, you know, like, and then, or the beginning of some sort of an answer. But it is a very, very important question that you ask, you know, like, but in another sense, I can say that, well, you know, like we have different layers, I would say, of abstraction and different layers of kind of responding to reality, you know, like, so yeah, sometimes we can go astray. Sometimes it can be like closer to the essence. And I definitely endorse what you said about, you know, like the reflexive side of consciousness for sure, you know, like, and that, you know, like that consciousness itself becomes the initiator of the action, you know, as, you know, like Vygotsky likes to say, you know, in the beginning was the action, he would say. I totally agree with that. But this itself is a source of, again, you know, like idolizing consciousness. So we have to be careful. And by practice, by activity, and so on and so forth, and subjectivity and all these things, I would endorse what Ilyenkov says, that we are not thinking about individual minds, but we're talking about the social mind after all. So that it is in this sense that activity is always prior, I would say. Thank you.
Wagner?
Thank you. First, I will send a link on the chat of a very interesting reflection. You can see later is a very interesting illusion of mirrors that the object seems to be real. So see later. I want to make some comments and some questions very quickly. As I understand, you quoted Engels very, very shortly. Most people quote Marx, but for me, these debates are more obscure in Marx. Like you have to go through the manuscripts and etc. But what Ilyenkov brings here for me is already in the anti-Düring of Engels. Not so organized, not so systematized, but still it is there. Like the ideal and science. Science is a social collective work, right? So, and I think for us to bring back the strength of the reflection epistemology of science, as to say, we need to bring more of the strength of Engels. I think there is a difference between, and many people seem to kind of confuse this, is that the debate of the reflection or the concept or the ideal, etc., and the verification of the reflection, the concept, etc. I think these are two different debates, like how I make an experiment and how I verify the results of this experiment. For me, there is this two debates. You approach it very when you talk about falsification, etc. But I think it's good to go deeper in this. You already quoted Vygotsky that everything starts with action, but what is interesting for me is that a Kantian biologist started this, Piaget, right? in psychology. Vygotsky criticizes and advances on the works of Piaget, and bringing in Engels and Lenin. Vygotsky then says inverts Piaget in some sense, and says no, the people can know reality, and this is how the concepts developed, and etc. I have a little disagreement with Professor Georgius. Luria has a very small and interesting paper on self-consciousness on his book of cognitive development about his research on Uzbekistan. And in this small research, he claims that self-consciousness is dependent on the social relations. And even when the person becomes self-aware and aware of the social relations, this development still needs the environment. It's not a self-contained development structure. And I have a question, two questions. Are there translations of the work of Hans Holz in English? Can you point to a work of him to start reading, or Spanish? I can read German, I can read Portuguese, English, but German and Russian for me is difficult. And also, are the translations of Ilyankov in English? They are good. Sorry for taking so much time, and thank you very much for the attention.
Maybe I answered the question to Holt concerning Holtz. We are working on translations in English right now. There is a small introduction written by Jörg Zimmer on the historical materialism website in the rubric figures, where he really explains it in a very brief and short way. And like there is a small brochure called Widerspiegelung Reflection. It is translated into Chinese and Turkish, as far as I know. But I can have a look at the bibliography, what is translated into Spanish or Portuguese, if you like.
You have another comment, or we should proceed? Lena Maria, the floor is yours.
Lena, are you there? Oh, go ahead, Lena.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Lena Maria.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So thank you for the presentation, first of all. I have 2 points I would like to raise, and the first one is I know you added this recently, so it might not be that worked out, but it's on the correspondence relations, because I was a bit I was wondering in the way you presented it now, whether you sort of mesh together a bit too much the correspondence relation and the dependence relation that you find in reflection theory, because you kind of translated correspondence into the dependence relation you brought up before. And I think these are, in a way, independent aspects that you find in a reflection relation. And I think it would be helpful to go a bit deeper into the discussion about the correspondence relations even more. And there's one point I think that is crucial also for connecting the two parts, because I think when you discuss the correspondence relation, you end up with some notion of the essential, because there needs to be something essential in the correspondence and not the mere appearance. And I'm wondering how this matches with Ilyenkov's idea. And I was I'm still thinking about that, the essence of the thing itself is an abstraction only possible in the social, and I'm wondering whether this adds up in the end. And this connects to like my second point, and I also think this would be helpful to address to link the two parts together a bit more, because I think there is sort of a different understanding of relation, and you addressed this partly as a more general ontological relation and as a relation of reflection in the mind, regardless of whether it's the individual or the social mind. And I think it would be fruitful to unpack this a bit further, to understand what is general about all reflection relations and what is specific about reflection in the mind. And this also concerns its relation to activity, because you can also understand this in a more general sense and in a more narrow sense. And as Martin already knows, because we discussed this previously, for Holz, of course, Leibniz's notion of the living mirror, the mirror vivants, is crucial there, which are also active mirrors, but which are more general than mere minds. So these are the 2 points, the correspondence relation and the general ontological versus more epistemological mental sense of reflection. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes.
Lena.
Thank you, Lena, for this question. I don't know if it's a mashup or a conflation. It was more like we have 4 criteria that should come together to form a relation. So x1 exists independently of x. It's just about the existence of different things that are material or ideal things, and the correspondence is how they are connected to each other. But the correspondence, we have to look at every case how this correspondence actually works. That's what, as far as I see from the history of Marxism, Leninism, is they try to figure out what kind forms of correspondence are possible, are good correspondences, are bad ones, and so on and so forth, and how far and to what extent you can talk about that. The crucial point for Holz and Wittig is here that the correspondence is a structural correspondence. As I try to illustrate it in the example. I can't hear Martin. Okay, sorry. Well, okay, my connection was unstable. I try to answer in a short way. Correspondence, like the question of dependence and independence of 2 different things, is the question of existence. The correspondence is how these things are correspond to each other in a structural way. So the example I gave is they are corresponding to each other in a structural way. So the difference in height and the difference in colors are matching each other when you point it in a structural way. And that is the interesting part. That in Marxism, Leninism, as far as I see in the history, they tried to figure out how correspondence worked and how to what extent you can talk about it, not in the way that these are equal relations and the things are equal, because they are not. A map is, of course, not a topological situation. We can talk about it via these kind of models as a product of social activity. These kind of maps are a product of social subjects working with sciences and doing performing labor, and we need that to orientate ourselves in reality. That is the idea of correspondence here. So as far as I see, there's no conflation here, because we can talk about correspondence if it happens or not, and then we can talk about bad and good correspondences. So maybe that could be some sort of answer here, but we can go on and we'll discuss it, I guess, for many years to come.
Great. So George Berger, do you have a question? Or I'm not sure. You have? George? No?
Okay. Yes, here I am.
You have?
Okay. Yeah, I have a few ideas about
Right.
the talk. Just points that I want to make. First of all, what I do want to say is very close to what Lena Maria already said, but let me fill that in anyhow. The notion of dependence that you set out at the very beginning is, this is Martin now. The notion that Martin set out about dependence at the very beginning is almost exactly, as far as I could see, a mereological version of the notion of a part. Proper part, or what, some kind of part, and that might be too restrictive to get the notion of reflection that you want. I don't know. I just want to make the point. So you have, and that's very, very mathematically strictly determined. A lot of philosophers know this. So what happens with that if you want to somehow encompass a lot of notions of reflection? I just don't know, but I want to make the point. The second point has to do with that, is that the very basic notion, let's say in measurement theory and psychology, is the notion of a homomorphism between one thing and one domain and another. And that starts to get what you're acting on in reflection here. But then that gets specified to the dependence notion that Martin introduced. So what to do with all of these, I don't know. I don't know. But what I also want to say is quite different. That I want to thank you for, Martin, Azeri, no, Martin, for mentioning Joseph Koenig. He was a teacher of a friend of mine in Bielefeld, a late friend of mine, professor of philosophy in Bielefeld, Germany, and seems to have been a very interesting thinker. I've been looking for his book on causality for ages. I can't find it anywhere. So if Martin can make a copy of me, if he has it, I'd be very happy. Okay, thank you.
Martin?
I can do that. I can do that. I can give you a copy of some writings of Joseph Koenig.
Thank you. Please
They're
do.
really hard to get.
It's not in Sweden
and
anywhere.
it's an interesting. He's really interesting because yeah. I mean, the point with Joseph Koenig is he's really an underdog, and he was criticizing Heidegger, writing a book called Being and Thinking, and there are just several articles he wrote about for some occasions, like academic ones and so. And it's very hard to read, actually. But basically, one of his main ideas is this elaborating this idea of self-difference and how we can make sense out of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry,
ahead.
George. It's Katie who is waiting. Katie, the floor is yours.
Oh, it just came up in the discussion of Nikolai Hartmann. That's all I wanted to say. And Koenig was a student, evidently, of Nikolai Hartmann in the Baltic states somewhere. That's all.
Okay, Katie.
Everyone, thanks for these great points. Thanks, Martin, for bringing the material with Holtz, which I didn't know about. I have a short answer to Georgius. The question was, what reflection reflects? Does it reflect appearance or essence? I think that definitely the essence. If it were not about the essence, then the whole pathos of it would be senseless. And I think Vygotsky, in his development of higher mental functions, is persevering with this condition of how to prove that the meaning is possible. So not simply the connection between signifier, signified, but the fact that this meaning is reflectable in the signifier. So just a small comment before my question, that in reflection, what is really also crucial is this connection, this Verbindung, that the reality is never lost. that whatever develops out of the reality and out of the activity, this connection should constantly be preserved. And reflection is not simply about being reflected, and even not simply the products of ideal activity, but the fact that this connection is never lost. So this is about labor too, to constantly keep the focus on this connection, and that reality is constantly there. And this is crucial for aesthetics as well, when we come to the discussion of realism with Lifshitz. So this is the point that abstraction is always criticized because this connection, this Verbindung with reality is broken. And now my question, which is also my problem when I mention this concept of objective reality, it is like red fabric generally for representatives of critical theory and generally at the discussions, because people react very critically at this term, objective. What is objective in objective reality? How can reality be objective if there is difference there? So how to put difference there? And if we put difference there, how it will be objective? So where is this totally objective subject? Who would objectivize this reality? It's clear that what Ilyenkov means is the ideal generally, but where is the subject of this generality? So how not to fall into this kind of pure optimism in which Ilyenkov is usually blamed in.
Can I go on? Maybe. Do you hear me?
Yanis, Siyaves is asking to speak.
Yes, go on, Siyaves.
Okay. Thank you, Katie, for the question. Well, I think well the objectivity of like this objectivity of the object is I think it's all kind of like reveals itself in the fact that we have to labor. Like that's the thing. That's something that is kind of I would say it is a determination that comes from without, if you wish, so to say. That the very fact that as you mentioned, like if we have to, like you mentioned yourself in your comment prior question, that it is labor that keeps the focus in a sense. And well, labor itself is the expression of objectivity. Like I think in the manuscripts, for instance, when Marx talks about, like this problem of objectivity of activity or objectivity of human activity, so on and so forth. He kind of dismisses this type of, like questions about whether there is a material world, objective world or not in the sense that, it cannot be resolved, but he considers them as some sort of caprice of ideologists, like, of course, he says, like, I mean, objectivity is there. Otherwise, we wouldn't act. You wouldn't need to do that, like the very fact that we think, the very fact that we are obliged to think in a sense, and perhaps this is also, like we can even relate this to very, contemporary, so to say, contemporary discussions about, for instance, whether machines can think, why should a machine think, for instance, like if like we cannot talk about the needs, social needs, and so on and so forth. So this is one thing. I mean, of course, like there can be different responses to reality, to this objective reality. And therefore, I would say that, like in these different levels, like reality reveals itself in different modes, so to say. I mean, like this famous kind of question that supposedly famous question or important question that Russell brings up, like about the table that when you look at it and touch it, just it is smooth and, with a certain color and so on and so forth. And then if you look at it with a microscope, the nuclear microscope, it's bumpy and no color and so on and so forth. And then comes his supposedly, question, irresolvable question, which one is the real, real table? And I think it's some sort of, we should not be dragged in that way, because these are different, I would say, the way that we react to this table, whatever, for some reason, you want to look at it, through microscope or just with our bare senses, it just corresponds to different, types of responses that we kind of come up against reality, so to say. Both of them are the same, we can say that, like both of them are the same, are the same table. But I would like to just relate this to some comment that Lena Maria meant as well, about this that essence appears only in social reality or in social universe. Exactly, like that is where, like the objectivity of the object, like lies, as a matter of fact. Like why essence appears there and why it is objective there, because, like we are as beings, like we are destined to labor, like it or not. We have to act, like, because we are biological beings with a, like lifespan and so on and so forth. And for the survival of species, if you wish, or whatever, we have to do that. And it's there, so the objectivity comes within this social universe, exactly. The essence, the objective essence, I would say.
I totally find your answer very convincing and cannot but agree with it. But imagine that I'm your counterpart in this argument. And my question is, what if I decide to put aside this kind of optimism and decide to die? What if a person stops to labor and the whole nation, the whole group of people, the whole community decides to vanish? So what if this kind of pessimism is inscribed into act?
I think I go with this, and I don't think I think Ilyenko is quite pessimist in this sense, particularly in humanism and science that I mentioned. As a matter of fact, like the fact that we act by itself is not something positive or negative. Like he there, in that particular essay, he talks about, like this relation between morality and science, or, like what he says, the romanticists, moralists that are supposedly are not acknowledged, are not knowledgeable enough, and then are scientists that are very cruel and cold and so on and so forth. But what comes there is that, like, because like the thing is this, because when we talk about labor, we're talking about, like a social form of it and so on and so forth. And even when we're talking about ideals, they are subject to this social form of social form and so on and so forth. They can be lethal, all these things that we're doing. They can, like, it's just like, imagine the situation at the moment, the polycrisis that we are facing, like our whole existence, and the whole existence, I don't know, it's a big chunk of, good chunk of life on Earth is under threat, exactly because of this objective activity that we have. So by itself is not something, like, I would say optimistic or positive. I don't know if I could go with you. Like, we are doing that as a species, like in a sense. We are just kind of depriving ourselves from the material that we could act with, like, and then we don't put an end to it. Actually, we'll arrive at such a point, I think, sooner or later.
Thank you, Siyaves. We've got 15 more minutes left, so please try to keep it short. Corinna, she wants to have a comment, and then I would like also to share some thoughts. If anyone else want to have some comments, can raise her hand. Corinna.
Thank you, Siyaves and Martin and everybody else, and especially Katie's comment later on, because I was actually going to come in on something on that theme, because while Siyaves has correctly critiqued Hegel, as well as pointing out to his contribution, I think there's a lot more that needs to be mined out of Hegel's science of logic, in particular the parts that Lenin reflected on at great with some detail. So I just got to readmit Wagner, he's come back. The point being that Hegel says essence is reflection within itself. He has a whole chapter on essence and reflection. And of course, a lot of it is couched in idealistic, duality, as you've pointed out, Siyaves, but nonetheless, he emphasizes this contradictory nature of reflection and essence. And in response to the question about does it reflect appearance? I can't remember, somebody raised that question. Does it only reflect appearance? Does reflection only reflect appearance? Well, that is explored by Hegel and Lenin also. The moments of reflection, the determinations of reflection, the importance of grappling and struggling with those questions as moments of negation. And as, of course, you're right, Siyaves, it's not just empty negation, dead negation, but the way it's developed materialistically through Marx and Ilyenkov in the ways that you've beautifully shown, I think. That is the inseparability of essence and the moments of essence. And that, as Paul's put a comment in the chat, which you probably didn't see, identity containing difference revealed through negation into self. So the identity of what is being reflected contains within itself already the negation. And so we have moments of multiple negation. And I think that's the important thing, is that all of this is obviously happening within the material world. And that's why Ilyenkov's great contribution was to materialize the ideal, to show how the ideal is objective, and it's not just individual consciousness, but collective human social consciousness produced by, as you've rightly said, through labor. Without labor, it wouldn't even be happening. So these are, I think, very important questions. The power of negation, what is negation, how the reflection is both negative and positive simultaneously. How can that be? It's, total contradiction, but as Siyaves emphasized, it's movement and development through contradiction. And I think that's the essence of reflection. Thank you.
Thank you, Corina. Siyaves, you have a comment, or Martin? All right. So, yes, go on.
Yeah, about Hegel. I mean, I was not trying to bash him. Actually, I because of the time constraint, I jumped over a paragraph, as a matter of fact, but I kind of praise him a lot through Ilyenkov. But I say he betrays himself. That's the problem.
Okay. I'll do some comments, I'll share some thoughts, and then after me is Wagner. Um, so, first, I have to say that I agree with your overall approach on this complex matter, and your speech was very stimulating. I'll share some thoughts in some aspects that you didn't include it. I'm not saying that you have included in your paper, but I think it's necessary to think from this kind of this perspective. I'm gonna stress right now, if we want to approach in more detail this complex issue. Um, Reflection at first point is the identity of being in thought. Okay, and we can say that we can already detect this kind of idea in Aristotle, but this idea was expressed very explicitly from Thomas Aquinas, that truth is adequation of the ideal and the real. What Hegel is doing is that he does not reject Aquinas' idea, but he does not conceives this identity as given, by saying that we have that the truth has to be developed in order to be proved that we have this kind of correspondence and adequation of the ideal and the real. Marx' famous inverting of Hegel consists in the fact that he conceives this kind of developmental um, uh, approach of the real and the ideal, and he relates it strictly with labor, with human activity in general, with the human interaction with nature and other humans. And from this point of view, for me, it is very important not only to revisit the problem of reflection from the aspect of the relation of human beings as social beings, their interaction with nature through labor and with other human beings, but also to try to revisit and rethink reflection from the point of view of the anthropogenesis, namely how reflection already exists implicitly, not explicitly, in animals, because reflexes, conditional reflexes, unconditional reflexes, and all this multiplicity of animal interaction with nature, and this kind of different degrees of animal interaction with nature, are some kind of reflection. Because reflection is the way that the being, a living being, and its associated environment, to use a Simondon's term, are embodied and are interconnected. And for me, what is very interesting in the problem of reflection within the Marxist debate is to try to revisit this Marxist debate from the point of view of the anthropogenesis. How specific interaction between animal behavior and the human environment develop through the process of biological evolution, and how, with the emergence of primates, because we see, and I say it very, very briefly, and I end with this, because we see in some kind of primates that um, uh, they develop some kind of acquired knowledge, and acquired knowledge is strictly related with the inner bonds between the members of the group. So the human relations are already conditioned with specific interaction with nature. So we have some kind of a complex process that the interaction with nature redefines with the interaction of individuals with other individuals of the genus, and vice versa. So I stress this topic. I know it's a bit complicated, but for me, I think it's very important to outline and to go deeper in the emergence of labor from the animal kingdom. Thank you both of you. You have a comment, Siyaves, or we should proceed with you have a comment?
Yes, I would say.
Martin.
I mean, I think it's connected to the question of the dialectics of nature, and the question how movement is attached to matter, and what kind of grades of movement can we talk of, and then we have to talk about the natural sciences and what actually they are there trying to grasp. But I'm totally agree with you, and that's the idea that, or the road that Holtz has taken, saying, okay, developing this ontological model is the basis to talk about the dialectics of nature again, in a sense that in a philosophical sense, and to try to show how human beings developed out of nature, contradicting nature, and again, by constructing societies, and now the nature is overarching again in the face of ecological crisis. So
thank you, Martin. Siyaves, you want to?
Just one little thing, like again, because this was we have very small time, but just to put one thing again, I think Ilyenko points towards this, and I don't know, I try to mention that definitely there is knowledge among animals, they're this, they're that, they act and so on and so forth. But something that, according to Ilyenko, is specific to humans is that we have, as human beings, we have We have a realm of ideals, and that's what makes the change. As a matter of fact, according to Ilyankov, and then it's important to reflect on that. Definitely, what you say, and in some phrase, actually, he even refers to labor as self-emergence of human society, something like that, more or less. He has the formulation like that. But definitely, it is something very, very important that for sure we have to work out. Thank you very much for the comment and question.
Thank you, Siyaves. Wagner.
I will try to be very, very brief. Continue on your topic. We have to go back to Engels on his text on how labor transformed monkeys. I don't know in English how it is translated. I read it in Portuguese. The apes into humans, right? And this thesis is still valid until today. His thesis on the 19th century. Of course, with many, many things that need to be updated, but the core idea is there. So, for example, we have tools made by apes from 3 million years ago. The first tools that needed to be teached, we cannot invent them in one lifetime, is from 1.5 million years ago. And our species, Homo sapiens, has 250,000 years, more or less. But art appears 64,000 years ago, not on humans, Homo sapiens, but in Homo neanderthalis. We probably learned from the Homo neanderthalis because we just, and music and other things. So this is social, even with other human species. Now we have only one, but there was a time there that we had 5 different human species at the same time. And to put in perspective, the first cities have about 10,000, 8,000 years of history ago. And we have class society only after the emergence of cities. So the way we think now is we have to, as Minos put very in a very good way, we have to look through the history of human development in total, not just as we see today. Like, we take for granted class society. Class society is just a very small part of our history, a very, very small part. And as a provocation, we are debating Marxist-Leninist philosophy, and about the practice, how to do science in a Marxist-Leninist way. Soviet Union did not try it, but couldn't. They did not succeed in change academia. We still have these feudal hierarchical relationships, and it was the same in Soviet Union. But they tried to, how is it in English? Democratic centralism, I think is the translation, I don't know. The mode of organization of the Marxist-Leninist parties. But it went terribly wrong. Like, Vygotsky in one of his notes was like, oh my God, people think I am not a Marxist, and so on. And we had the Pavlovian sections in the 40s and 50s. And I will not even enter in the terror of the 30s. So things went terribly wrong. So if it's true work that we can reach the real and truth, how we do scientific work today.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Wagner. Thank you. Siyaves, Martin?
May I say one thing? And I agree about going back to Engels. By the way, the first issue of Marxism and Sciences was dedicated to Engels. I recommend you to take a look at it, please. There's a lot of debates going on about Engels there. The second thing was about what does it mean to be, like we had the second symposium of Marxism and Sciences in Mureș County here in Romania this past September, and that was the major question. What does it mean to be a Marxist scientist? We don't know yet, but that's an important question. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Siyaves. So we don't have any more time. Corina, she will get the floor to say a few words before closing.
Thank you, Jens. Well, thank you, everybody, for taking part in this. Obviously, there's remaining questions that haven't been answered and that need development. I would love it if we could have a further session early in the new year on this subject. I think we should schedule that, and I would love the help of Siyaves and Martin and everybody else here who's got suggestions about that. And I mean, particularly the points that Katie raised as well. If we could have maybe a round table or some further work on this, because obviously we've had a very wide-ranging discussion, including anthropology, the rise of the class society, the rise of human beings, and all these questions. So going back, coming all out of reflection. So could we all agree that? And thank you very much for this discussion tonight. And that's it.
Thanks a lot.
The next one
Thank you,
will be
guys.